Hello, lovely women of our panel. Hello, lovely audience members today. My name is Katie Christensen. I'm the Curator of Education and Statewide Engagement at the UW Art Museum. And it is such a great pleasure to welcome you all and say Happy Women's History Month. I feel like sometimes we need a little joy right now, and I think this is going to be a joyful event today. So a little bit of introduction before I turn it over to our guests today. I'm going to mute Nimi real fast. There we go. And when you're ready, we'll unmute you, Nimi, okay? Yep. Cool. So since the early 1900s, women across the world have been gathering, marching, and demanding equality. March is Women's History Month, and time to reflect on extraordinary accomplishments of women in shaping our country's history. This year's theme for International Women's Day, which was just celebrated on Tuesday, is choose to challenge, rather. Our guests have no doubt chosen to defy expectation and set new paths forward for themselves and for generations to follow. Each of our guests today has been featured in the multidisciplinary project produced by fifth generation Wyomingite, Lindsay Linton Buk. The project is called Women in Wyoming, Portraits and Interviews of Women Who Shaped the West. In the chat, you will see a link for the exhibition as it's seen on the, hang on just one second, my friends. So my colleague is posting in the chat a link to the exhibition. And before you all joined, there was a video that was playing that's of the exhibition here at the University of Wyoming. If you haven't yet done so, you can check out the website for Women in Wyoming, where you can access all the portraits and the podcast interviews with all of the incredible women. That link is also featured in the chat right now. A few housekeeping things. I want to take a brief moment to just honor the land that we reside on and its original caretakers, the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, and Shoshone indigenous peoples, along with the other native tribes who call the Great Basin and Rocky Mountain region home. A huge thank you to sponsors of the exhibition here at the UW Art Museum, Genesis Alkali, Wyoming Public Media, and Wyoming Arts Council, who receives funding from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Wyoming Legislature. If you need transcription for today's event, I think Noelle Schatz is here today, and she'll be posting a link in the chat. It's best to view that in split screen so you can see our guests as well as transcription. Thanks to her for joining us. So how is today going to work? We have a set of questions for each panelist, but we're hoping that you as the audience will participate too. So to do that, you can either type along in the chat box or you can use the Q&A function. Both are located at the bottom of the screen. We recommend viewing today in gallery view. There's a little button at the top of your Zoom screen that allows speaker view or gallery view. Gallery view lets us see the whole Brady Bunch box. Speaker view is just one person at a time. So you can choose, but we definitely want to see all of our featured guests today. We are also focusing on 2 of the chapters from Lindsay Linton Buk's project. There are a total of 5, and it continues to evolve and grow. So the first project is called Breaking Boundaries. It's the debut chapter from Women in Wyoming and highlights some of Wyoming's modern pioneers and women who have overcome a great deal of personal odds and obstacles. Chapter 3 is called Power and explores truth, voice, and authenticity in action, as well as the power of potential. So while Lindsay couldn't be with us today, and we're saddened by that, it is my great pleasure to moderate the discussion today and to introduce our panelists. So from chapter 1, we have the Honorable Marilyn Kite. Give us a wave, Marilyn, say hello. Nimi and Nina McConigley. Awesome. And then from chapter 3 today, we are joined by Aura Newlin. Thank you all for being here today. So we're going to start with Marilyn today. You can see her image up on the screen. This is the image or the portrait that is featured in the exhibition. If you don't know Marilyn, she's Wyoming's first female Supreme Court Justice and Chief Justice. And in 2000, she became the first woman appointed to our highest court, and later became the first female Chief Justice. During her time on the bench, she was tasked with rewriting the state school finance case and helped to establish an access to justice fund for Wyoming. Marilyn is thoroughly a Wyoming woman, as you see in her picture there. She was born in Laramie and attended the University of Wyoming. She stayed in Wyoming after graduation, where she became an influential force in developing the Wyoming branch of Holland and Hart, which is now a nationwide law firm. And Marilyn is also an accomplished horsewoman and was one of the founding mothers of the first women's antelope hunt. So Marilyn, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Our dialogue today, so just a few questions that Lindsay actually decided to kind of put forward some things. And she had said back in 2000, wondering if you felt the significance of being appointed as the first woman to the bench and breaking that glass ceiling. Were you aware at the time of that significance? And if so, what did it feel like?
Well, I don't know if I was aware of the long-term significance, but certainly it was a thing at the time. So, there was a lot of discussion, and of course I enjoyed the benefit of that, but I always felt that it was essentially a happy circumstance of history. There should have been a woman on our court a lot earlier, but the truth is there just weren't that many women lawyers, and consequently there weren't that many women lawyer applicants. I later served, before I was on the court and after, on our judicial nominating commission, and it was painfully obvious that we had a real dearth of women who had been in practice long enough to have the credentials to apply. So I got to be the lottery winner, and very much have enjoyed and appreciated that privilege.
It's amazing to think that Wyoming had all of these firsts, but it wasn't until just 20 years ago, right? What happened in between almost. So what advice would you give to other women today and who are trying to kind of make their way?
Well, there's no, I don't not particularly have any key to the approach that every individual woman should take, but certainly to feel no boundaries. If there haven't been women in a particular activity or profession or position that you think you would enjoy, you need to simply go out and get it. And you can get yourself prepared and take advantage of the opportunities that come along. There were, I think, 7 lawyers in Wyoming when I graduated from law school. So we see the tremendous growth that has occurred. But as you pointed out, the first justice of the peace in the whole country was in Wyoming in 1869. And it took till 1980 until we had another appointed general jurisdiction kind of judge. So there was too little progress early. Lots of progress now. The Wyoming Supreme Court has a majority of women, or 3 out of 5 who are women. So I would say to all women, and young and old, if there's something that is satisfying to you and attractive to you, there isn't obviously any limitation, any reason why you shouldn't be able to enjoy that satisfaction.
Awesome. Marilyn, thank you. I'm going to introduce some of our next panelists. We'll have a few questions and then we'll open it up to the whole group. So please help me in welcoming Nimi and Nina McConigley. So this is actually one of the 2-part features in Lindsay Linton Buk's exhibition. So I'm going to introduce Nimi first. They're both listed as Nina, but you'll figure out which one's which if you don't know these two lovely women. So Nimi's story Storied life began in Madras, India, where she became an established journalist working for India's first and to date only Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. She attended Columbia School of Journalism, worked at WGBH, the PBS station in Boston, then ran her own station in Delhi. There she met her husband, Pat, and relocated because of Pat's work to Casper, Wyoming, where they lived for the last 40 years. In Casper, Nimi became the first woman of color to run a television news station and later ran for office and became the first Indian-born person in the entire US to serve in state government. Known as a community-minded person for years before running for office, Nimi helped start the hospice program in Casper, as well as weekly foreign film club. Her story is a true tale of courage, being yourself and embracing difference as strength. Her daughter, Nina McConigley, is an accomplished author whose work tells a less common story of Wyoming, one of identity, race, and the immigrant experience in the rural West. Nina didn't always know that she wanted to become a writer, though. It took working as an insurance job after college for her to realize she needed to pursue other interests. She signed up for her first creative writing class and never looked back, and we are so grateful. Her first book, Cowboys and East Indians, won the prestigious Penn Open Book Award in 2014, as well as the High Plains Book Award that made Oprah's list. And if you haven't read it, it's so, so good. Just please go pick it up. Nina's passionate about sharing a different perspective of Wyoming with her students as well. She's an esteemed professor at the University of Wyoming in the Warren Wilson MFA program for writers, teaches around the country. Nina tells Lindsay what it was like to grow up in Wyoming as a woman of color and her creative process. So if you listen to the podcast, you can hear a little bit more of insights from both of them. But welcome to you both today. I'm so excited that we got technology to work and that you're here. So one of the questions that Lindsay thought would be interesting for both of you, but maybe particularly Nina, Lindsay's project really has this motto or this mantra of seeing is believing. And so thinking about this year, we have the first female vice president, but also of South Asian descent. Nimi, do you want to talk a little bit about what that's like for you? And let's see if we can get you unmuted. There we go.
Well, from my own experience and background in India, it wasn't that surprising that a woman could be vice president. In India in 1966, which is God knows how many years ago, Mrs. Gandhi was elected Prime Minister of India. And in 1966, in the US, we were still fighting equality issues and racial issues. Being a woman alone wasn't bad, but people of color were not allowed to enter politics. So a backward country, as it was perceived then, it was surprising that an Indian woman could be elected to a country of, at that point, I think 7 or 8 million people, and was totally accepting of that fact in a country where women were supposedly backward. So for me, I had been through that, watched India in its emergence after independence, where many women were elected. And so for me, finding a woman finally in 2020 being elected as a vice president was long overdue and not surprising. As an Indian woman myself, I'm not surprised either that Kamala Harris has made it this far. When you live in a country where you are perceived as a minority, as a woman, and you've gone through all the passages of proving yourself to be equal to men, you have a cultural burning fire in you to do your best to be equalized in society. And Kamala Harris, not only as an Indian, but as a foreign Indian living in America, woman of color, probably all her life had to work hard to get where she did. And that tenacity and courage, I think, is what brought her here to this point. And I'm not surprised, because when you're on the outside, in some ways, you work harder and you prove yourself more than you could. And because I remember when I was elected to the legislature when I was standing in the House, and I was honorary speaker for the when we were all accepted to the legislature. I stood there and I thought, here I am, an Indian woman from India who grew up there, left India after 30 years old, and I'm here in a culture that's possibly very different. And I thought, if I could do it, anyone can do it. And that was my message since I've been in politics, that it's possible for anyone here to do that, given the fire in your belly, your desire to make a difference, and your belief in yourself.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nimi. And Nina, do you have a perspective? I know now you have 3 generations, you have a daughter now too. And so do you have thoughts on what it's like to have Vice President Kamala Harris in the White House? And on International Women's Day, President Biden announced a gender policy council within the White House. And it's kind of, she's leading the charge on that, which is really exciting. What are your thoughts?
You know, I was surprised. Well, I want to preface this by saying, I'm sorry, I had my second COVID shot yesterday and I'm feeling a little bit under the weather today. I am a little bit feverish. And so if I answer in a fever dream, I apologize. I did not expect to be sick today.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, it's just, I'm just a little slow, I feel. You know, I was actually very surprised how emotional I was. Not that I wasn't invested in this election, I was very invested. I felt like the last 4 years had been really divisive and hard. And but I also, because I had a new baby and it was COVID, I also was a little removed from, I was kind of also trying not to watch the news a lot because I was kind of anxious. And the night, you know, when she was picked as the presidential pick, I was so surprised. I mean, I had my small daughter on me and I was nursing her, and I was kind of taken aback by how emotional I was when she was up on stage. Like I'm getting teary now thinking of it. And I don't, there's something about that night that, and when they won, it just felt like it just, I think all women felt it. I think really they did. I mean, it really was amazing. And also just to, I mean, I'm so used to growing up here in Wyoming and I love Wyoming, but I just don't see a representation of myself on a daily basis. I see it occasionally. I see it in my mom. I see it in, you know, but I don't see it on a daily basis. And, you know, when people say representation matters, like it really does matter. I mean, for me to look and say like a woman who looks like me is the vice president of the United States, it really hit me. And I, you know, I held my daughter, she's 1 now, but I held her up, you know, at the day of the election. And when the election was called, and on inauguration day, my husband and I we were both very emotional because it just felt, I don't know, it did feel like, I'm like, she will never know, I mean, I guess the first few months of her life, but she will never not know a world where a woman's not in a really high office like that. And I just, you know, I'm still amazed that Indians are in like sitcoms. So it's like, it was something for me to see that representation.
Yeah, I can relate to that daughter moment too, because I got super teary-eyed as well, just having a woman in that space when we'd never known that before. And I think about Marilyn, like leading the charge with that too. Like it's so important to see women in these places. And Nimi, we talked about that a little bit yesterday too, of just the importance of representation. I want to come back to this. I don't want to leave Aura out. So I'm going to introduce Aura and then we'll come back together as a group. So Aura Newlin is a delight. We actually had the pleasure of working with her last semester on a project about moving walls and the internment camps or concentration camps up in Wyoming. But she's a Wyoming anthropologist, an educator, and advocate, and she educates her students and audiences around the country about Japanese American incarceration during World War II. She's a 4th generation, a Japanese American Wyomingite, and she's her Wyoming roots really run deep. I'm tongue-tied today, sorry, my friends. So she grew up in Riverton. Her parents were former Peace Corps volunteers, and they really exposed Aura and her siblings to a broader world through international volunteer work. She's got lots of roots and connections to Central America as well. This global imprint really influenced her interest in learning about other cultures and led her to become an anthropologist. She says, anthropology turns everything on its head. As anthropologists, we try to understand what it might be like to live through someone else's shoes, to understand their experiences, what their experiences are like through their eyes. So Aura, thank you for being here. We're so delighted to have you join us at the Art Museum again. Questions for you, just thinking about your context. Talk about your experience in Wyoming and the impacts of that international things, but also representation for you. What was that like growing up and your experience kind of participating in this big project, Women in Wyoming?
Well, it's interesting. I think, like Nina, I've been focusing a lot on identity over the past several years, and sort of picking apart what my identity has been as a Wyomingite and also a woman of color. But in my experience growing up, I'm, what we call white passing. So in my experience, most people treated me as if I was white. And so I grew up, knowing that I was really connected to my Japanese and Japanese American heritage. But I think that I was trying to compare myself with, people who are white. When it came to body image, I've been thinking about this. I don't know why this is coming up because it's like not that big of a deal for me. But I remember growing up and all of the things that I didn't like about how I looked. Now I realize that those are the Japanese features of me, which is so sad. And now I like those features of myself. But I think because I was perceived as white and I kind of thought of myself as being kind of white, I was more disappointed with the Japanese features that I had. My brother and sister are both more ethnic looking than I am. And it's been really interesting for me to think about how, they have lived, we're in the same family, we're very close in age. Really, our educations have been the same, our parents are the same. And they have grown up feeling like they're outside of the majority. They've grown up feeling targeted as people of color. And I didn't even know that until, quite recently. So that's been an interesting kind of discovery for me. And now that I'm spending, most of my professional time and social time actually with people of color, I am seeing myself more as a woman of color and celebrating in that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I like to think that, so you're in chapter 3, power, right? Like it's almost as if you're like coming into your own power and your own identity and modeling that for other people. What a gift for all of us, I think. Thank you. Do you have thoughts on being in the power chapter? What does that mean for you?
It's aspirational, for sure. And I feel like I'm coming into it, not because of being in that chapter, but I'm glad that I ended up in that one because I have been, especially in the past couple of years since that profile was done, I feel like it's been an amazingly empowering experience for me. I have learned to step up in ways that I didn't really think I had it in me to step up as. And yeah, I just feel a lot of courage, and I feel like it's my, if given that I come from a position of an awful lot of privilege relatively, if I'm given an opportunity to advocate for other people, then I've been taking every opportunity that I can, which feels really good.
Awesome. I want to be able to make this more conversational and open it up to each other. And I first want to know, do our panelists have questions for each other? I think Nimi and Marilyn know each other. And I think maybe some folks know Aura. Do you guys have questions for each other in relationship to power or leading the way, or what it was like to participate in this project?
I'd like, Aura and I have had a chance to to meet and spend a little time visiting. And I think one of the impressive things, especially when I hear you today, she was instrumental in hosting a conference in Cody and I'll get the name wrong, Aura, so you'll have to correct it, but there's a National Commission on Racial and Ethnic Fairness in the court system. And it was a real eye-opener to me. It was an interesting way of sort of reaching across the women in this project, and recognizing that every human being has a bias of some sort, and it comes from your history and your past and your teachings, and whether you like to admit you have it or not, you do. So her reaching out and creating that environment in which to discuss uncomfortable issues with a bunch of old stodgy judges was real refreshing, and shows the power that you have, Aura, as an individual to, get out of your normal course of work and affect other lives. I think that's a challenge for everybody, but certainly for those of us on this panel that have been lucky enough to have a position or some success, that maybe that's incumbent upon us to try to reach out like that. Do you agree, Aura?
Yes, and thank you so much, Marilyn. It was amazing to have you at this conference because you were Chief Justice at the time. And so we had, I don't remember the numbers, about 200 judges and lawyers from around the country, mostly judges and lawyers of color, coming to Cody and Heart Mountain specifically as this site of, past racial injustice. And that was really the beginning of a path that has continued for me. I've become heavily involved with the law now and working with judges all across the country, educating about race. And one of the crowning moments of the past couple of years for me was getting to, have conversation with Marilyn through this project. We had never, we met at the conference, but hadn't really had conversations before. And then this project provided the impetus for me to reach out to Marilyn again and say like, hey, let's continue the conversation within the Wyoming judiciary and the Wyoming Supreme Court. And she had retired at that time, but through some collaborations over the past couple of years, we were able to get an implicit bias training at the last state judicial conference. So now, it's a first step, but a lot of judges in Wyoming have now been introduced anyway to the idea of implicit bias and the mind sciences of race. And I'm gonna keep poking you, Marilyn, and following up to get more programming to the courts so that we can build on that session.
All right, that's so awesome. Sorry, go ahead, Marilyn.
Well, I was just going to say, now I'm going to get Nina and Mimi mixed up, but I wish I had been there that day that you were on the floor, Mimi, right?
Yes, Mimi.
At the Wyoming legislature, and it's pains me to see how few women are there now, let alone women of color. I don't know what your reaction to that is. Yeah, you have this sense that we make all this progress, but you have to recognize that we sort of have steps backwards at times too. Do you have a reaction to that?
On that note, and listening to you, Marilyn, about your appointment almost 20 years ago, there's a point I'd like to bring up, and that is that unfortunately for the first women who stepped forward and were appointed or elected, there was a unpleasant sort of commentary that this was a token appointment in Wyoming. We're doing something so different and brave, which takes away from the validity of the women who have earlier been appointed in positions. And I think it somewhat continues today, because I look at President Biden's appointments, and people will say, oh, these women are coming forward because he wants to, sort of validate women in his government. But I think it's unfair to people, because ultimately, I like to believe that every woman who's chosen for a position of any kind are equal and preferred to the male candidate who was up against them. And so it not only enhances that woman's stature, but gives her credibility in her job. Because when a woman is appointed and say, oh, that was a token appointment, if I applied with 5 other men and they appointed me, they'd say, oh, that's a kind of a nice touch because we need a brown face in the legislature or wherever I am. And I think it's unfair to women. And I think people need to recognize that all things being equal, a woman is chosen because of her ability and her qualifications and experience. And I find that still continues. I remember when Nina and Leela applied, my daughters applied for college, and I'm sure Nina doesn't want me to share any stories about her, but when she applied for college and they got into a really good college, people would say to me, well, that's kind of nice you're from Wyoming and you're sort of biracial, because that gives you an edge over other students. And I'd like to believe that my daughters got in because they're qualified, and which they've proven since. But that is a image that a lot of people of color and women face when they're chosen for something. And I think we need to get over that, and the fact that women are valid in their own right and are superior to men for any particular position for which they're chosen. And that's been a problem for me. But in Wyoming legislature, it was interesting because when I was elected, I was the first person born in India to be elected to any legislature in the United States. So that was kind of a nice touch. But that it happened in Wyoming surprised everybody. When I was in Washington for a meeting or something, and somebody asked me where I was from, and I'd say I'm from Wyoming, they said, what? And sometimes if I'm not wearing my Indian dress with a spot on my head, they'd say, what tribe are you? Thinking I was either Shoshone or Arapaho or some tribe I was a Native American. But it was interesting that Wyoming, which is considered in many ways backward in social progress, should have elected me and chosen me to run. And that's because I hoped that I had the qualifications and the validity for the job, which ultimately you have to prove. But I think that more women should step up and believe in their ability to be equal or better for any job that they apply to.
Well said.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you're in the chapter breaking boundaries with Marilyn, right? Like you're paving the way for all of us. Nina, do you have any response to that? I mean, what's it like with your mom being this groundbreaking person, and you're also a groundbreaking person? Like, what was it like to have her as this influencer?
Well, my mom is a very strong personality, and it's interesting because I teach here at UW, I teach an Indian literature class, and I've noticed the trend in a lot of the stories we read and a lot of the texts I teach. Women are sort of, we talk about arranged marriage. We talk about, I don't know, I sometimes worry that my students get the impression that, Indian women are somehow beaten down or just, live in a super patriarchal society. Because, I have always had this example that's completely different than the norm. I mean, I think about my mom, and you talked about, I think about this in my fiction a lot, about we're a lot of immigrants being a new kind of pioneer. And I think about, what it took to come to Casper in 1976. I mean, no one would rent a house to my parents when we lived in the Ramada Hotel for months because people wouldn't rent to a biracial couple. And I think I look back on experiences, and I'm really glad that my mom has the personality that she does. I have a very different personality. I'm much quieter. I do not go into things quite the same way, but I also, just thinking about some of these things, I agree with all the sentiments everyone's saying, but last year I found myself feeling a little annoyed during some of the suffrage stuff. I felt like, yeah, okay, we gave women the right to vote. I'm so happy that we did that. But I also look at like gender, the pay gap, and I look at like how many women have. I mean, as Marilyn said, like there aren't that many women in our legislature. And I also, it was white women got the right to vote. It wasn't a lot of women of color. And I feel like that, last year I felt like I was a little bit raining on the parade a little bit, because I just was like, yes, all these things have happened in Wyoming, and I am glad we had a governor, and I'm glad we gave women the right to vote, but also let's examine a little bit like where our state's at, because I don't think 100% Wyoming is quite there at the equality state in a lot of ways. And I you know, again, I love Wyoming so much, but I think we have a ways to go. I really do. You know, even looking at female professors that are tenured at the state at the university, it's a much lower number, and I don't know. I think about this a lot. I think because I have a daughter now.
Hey, Nina, I have a comment, I guess, for Nina and Nimi. You'd mentioned your parents being a biracial marriage.
Mhm.
So Nina, your husband is white. And we just
Yeah.
discovered, Nina and I just discovered that we have this other connection. So my mom is ethnically Japanese. My dad is white, Irish. And he was in the Peace Corps in the late 1960s. And Nina had said something about how my dad was in the Peace Corps in the late 1960s, and that's how he met my mom. So that's not how my dad met my mom, but I thought that was really interesting. So even though the focus here is on the women, I think it's interesting that actually both of our dads who are white don't really fit the stereotype either of, you know, your dad is an oil guy, right? And my dad is a, you know, retired plumber, contractor, you know, white Wyoming type men, but they're also Peace Corps volunteers, and they entered into, you know, biracial marriages. And I don't know if you had any thoughts on maybe Nina about marrying a white man at the time, and if you got, you know, looks from people either in India or here in Wyoming, and what that was like for you.
I mean, I think for me, I think my mom and I both would probably have a similar story. Like, we definitely fell in love with a person, and you know, my husband does a lot of work in India, and I felt like he, you know, one of our first dates, I felt like he understood that part of me. But you know, strangely, what we connected on more was he's from Oregon, and we just had a love of the West, and I think that was a funny. I think we both very strongly feel a connection to land and place, and you know, I think that was the thing that sort of stuck us together in a way. And I also know that you know, I think part of the reason people ask me about why I like so fervently cling to Wyoming, and ask me like, why don't you live somewhere more diverse, or but I think that for me, because I'm biracial, because my dad's white, my mom's Indian, I think I felt a little bit unsure of both of their race. Like, I didn't connect hugely to either of what their I don't know. I didn't look like my dad's family. My mom's family, I didn't speak Tamil, her language. And I think that for me, I really then, my identity became Wyoming very strongly, and being a Wyoming woman very, very, very strongly. And this place is somewhere that, like, to me, it's just such a, I mean, it sounds so cheesy when I say it, but it's just such an extraordinary place. And I think that, like, I think part of the reason I've clung to this is that. And I definitely could not have married someone that didn't, I couldn't import in, and who doesn't love Wyoming as much as I do, because that wouldn't work.
What I think, Nina, if I
Oh.
can say something here, I think, Nina, you frustrated all my attempts for an arranged marriage, you know. But I'd like to say that being biracial in Wyoming is a great advantage, because you have more than this culture to draw upon. And I think a child that's biracial has the advantage of having two cultures that actually widen their horizons and make them a fuller person or a richer person. Because Nina's father is Irish too, and I'm Indian. And so Nina has the advantage of, at home, where I keep a very Indian household. And so Nina, especially because there's no other Indians here, I wanted to make sure Nina would have learn about India and traditions and culture, especially food, because I couldn't bear the idea of my family not eating Indian food. But Nina got all of that. But also she went and spent a year in Ireland to know her father's roots. And she's a very wonderful, balanced combination of Ireland and India. But she chose above all to be Wyoming. And she is completely Wyoming. When I see her sometimes in her lumberjack shirts and her jeans. And I wonder, where did this child come from? What happened to the sari and the spot on your forehead? But I find Nina a much richer person for all the cultural things. And I think children who grow up biracial are very fortunate.
There's a question in the chat that's actually, I think, really appropriate at this moment. And it seems like it's Nancy McCammon Hansen. She knows you from Casper. So I'll skip forward a little bit. But the Great Casper Gourmet Club and Literary Soiree Society was a very diverse group, she says. Did you consciously look for people who were, I'll air quote, different? And I don't like that word, but can't think of a better one at this point. Or did it just happen? Maybe talk a little bit about how you bring people together. And I'll put it back to this exhibition. How did this exhibition start to bring people together? Because it sounds like there's been some connections because of the exhibition. So maybe that's a two-part question that I'll start with Nimi. And you can talk about your Casper days.
I didn't even know that that group had such an impressive name. I'm glad. And Nancy was here when we first arrived, which is, we've been in Casper 45 years. That's a long time, almost half my life. But when I came here, Casper in 1976 was a very different place. Not many ethnic restaurants except for Chinese. And we, as Nina said, we lived in the what is now the Parkway Hotel, but was the Ramada for 7 weeks looking for a place to live. And my husband was a geologist, was gone all the time. So I was stuck here with, Nina was 1 and Neela was 2.5. And I had 2 small children. I wore a sari and I spoke with something of an accent at that time. And, I didn't drive because I drove on the wrong side of the street. So I was pretty much abandoned here in Wyoming. And then by the time we settled in, I met people and I thought I've got to get involved because I've never been uninvolved in my life. So I went to the local library and met a librarian there. And when I studied in Columbia in New York, I've really got into film in a big way, particularly foreign films and classic films. And I took some classes on film and I loved film. And when I came here, there were 2 theaters in Casper, which ran like Clint Eastwood, Rambo 1, 2, and 3. And, that was the extent of movies at that time. And I was really heartbroken. So I went to the library and said, what can I do to start a film club here? And I thought the best way to do is to write a grant and get some credibility. So I called the Wyoming Council for the Humanities and I wrote a grant, Women in Foreign Film, which sounded impressive. And so then I wrote up some notes on how we should understand women elsewhere. And I actually got the money to rent 10 films from New York. And I ran a little film festival at the library just to say, let's try this out. And I ran Swedish films, French films, Japanese films, Indian films. And I had 100 people show up at the library. And they were all people like me who had come from elsewhere. They were first generation Wyomingites. There were people who had moved for the oil business here. A lot of people who were familiar with this, but had not had the access. So at the end of the series, I asked people, do you want to become members and we can do this regularly? I started this in 1977 and until I had my first sort of major medical problems. For 20 years, I ran this every Friday night at the library and it grew. And my first friends came out of that group because there were some people who are French, German, people of different languages and cultures. And naturally we grew together because all foreigners love food. They're all foodies because they miss their own food. So in my house, we sort of started a group of people who would come together and we'd cook together. And Nancy and her husband, who was a minister at the local church here, they were here and Nancy joined and a couple of other people. And we started this club, which was sort of a literary gourmet club. It was really quite just family cooking of our own. But we met regularly and that was the roots of our friendships in Casper. And I still see people from that group and they've always were interesting people with different experiences. And that's where it all started.
So it sounds like a little bit of both then. It was happenstance and intentional of bringing those different folks together. And I think that just reminds me of the benefits of Wyoming, right? Like we are it's the saying, it's a small town with long streets, right? And I think that's the size of our state. We have the ability to connect in other ways. And I think that kind of contributes to the importance of this project. Do all the panelists want to address kind of the Wyoming question and how Wyoming has influenced you, or how you see the benefits of some of these things?
You know, my father's family came from England and ended up in Hannah, Wyoming, and we're coal miners. My mother's family came from Ireland and from Iowa, and ended up outside of Daniel, Wyoming. And you know, I sort of feel like many Wyoming people do, these ridiculous deep roots and this incredible loyalty to Wyoming. And I don't know, you know, as you watch the state evolve, sometimes I kind of wonder why I'm so connected. I mean, I love the country, I love the outdoors. I love what I think is the inclusiveness of Wyoming. But I feel like we are going through a period right now that is I don't know, damaging isn't the right word, but it's certainly having an effect on what we all feel is the community of Wyoming. And that is this whole influx of sort of social media and much more of an outside influence. Not that we didn't have issues here also, but I fear the losing of the fabric of Wyoming because of what's happening nationally. And if there's anything this project has done, every time I have been able to see the photographs and listen to the podcasts and think of the way these different women have lived their lives and have been in Wyoming and represent the real roots of Wyoming, it's important that we continue to highlight those kinds of lives that are lived all over the state. Very different, but very connected to what I think the values of Wyoming, we'd like to think that they are. And it's important that those voices continue to speak out and be heard and be observed in our community, which are voices that are constructive and are inclusive and are, you know, appreciative of what we have here, but working to keep it. And I'm not exactly sure what the technique is to do that, but projects like this certainly take a big step in that direction. I've had the fun in the last couple months listening. My father made audio tapes of my grandmother and other people in Hannah, and we couldn't access them. I finally got them digitized, and listening to some of the stories of what happened in that small mining town that long ago is really eye-opening. But one of the things that, you know, it was a melting pot like Rock Springs and the whole UP line was, but a family story that I'd never heard before, that my father's family was German and my grandmother's family was English. And the treatment of the Germans during and after World War I was horrible. It would have been a great uncle of mine was tarred and feathered in Hannah because he was German. And my grandmother took her children, my dad and the two other little kids, and hid in their house because she was afraid they would come and take her children. Well, of course, that we don't see that now, but none of us are safe from that kind of behavior. And we need to really live what we think of as Wyoming, which is being independent and appreciating differences and inclusive and, you know, tough. And if you're, you know, we want to enhance, I guess, those qualities that we believe are Wyoming qualities. And really, I look, and those of you in the audience who haven't had a chance to look at the whole presentation, the photographs, you're just so struck with the differences of all those women, and yet this glue of whatever the heck Wyoming is that sort of holds us all together.
Other panelists' thoughts?
Can I add something to what Marilyn said? I think when I first came here, I was absolutely shocked at what I'd let myself in for, because we came out from Singapore where my husband had been working. And Singapore, as you know, it's like a paradise island. And we came here in October after the first snows, and we were stuck in the hotel for 7 weeks trying to find a place to live. It was not the best welcoming entry for me to this life. And for the first few months, I was unhappy, miserable, wanted to get out of here. And then I realized the only way you belong is by volunteering and doing something to get into the community, the real community. And so I did a lot of volunteer work with the hospice, with the library, with other things I got. And as I gave more, I got so much more when I arrived here. And I thought to myself, I could have gone to New York, where I was familiar with things, and Boston, but I would not have had the opportunities to give as much as I gave here, because I would be among, I don't know, thousands of Indians who live there. Anywhere I'd gone, I would have been another Asian immigrant. But here, when I came here, I felt there was room for me to involve myself, to make a difference, to be part of this community, and really reach out and understand and learn what Wyoming was all about. And when times came for, it was absolutely natural for us to move. We retired, the children got married, and the thought came up. And my husband said to me, you wanted a warm climate, you wanted a beautiful place, and you wanted to do, live in an urban community. Maybe we should now move. And when that came a few years ago, I decided I didn't want to leave here. I did not want to leave here because of the people, because of the connections, because of the roots I'd laid here. And I thought to myself, this is weird. Here I am, we can go anywhere we want as a retired couple, but I want to stay here. And this has been a real wonderful realization for me that we made the right choice of staying here. We travel a lot, we go overseas quite a bit, but when I come home and we come from the airport, sometimes there's this beautiful yellow light in the evenings that you find, a golden light that's just before sunset that you get on Wyoming. And once what I thought was a horrible, grim landscape, when I come back now, even from a place like Ireland, which is so green and beautiful, I drive back and I feel like I'm coming home when I see that golden light on the prairie and on the Casper Mountain. And I know that it has got me. And I understand why Nina doesn't want to live anywhere else when she has choices and wants to be a Wyoming girl. It's more than landscape. It's more than anything. It's the people and the belonging we have here.
Well put, Nini. How about for Aura and Nina? Like, what's the importance of this project and that it's in Wyoming, and what's the impact for you?
Go ahead, Nina.
Okay. I will say I wish Lindsay was here, because I just would love to also just give her another round of applause, because she's amazing, and she's worked, I think, really hard to just find women. I mean, I feel like I've grown up here for 40 years, so I'm like, I know everybody. I don't know. And I've been really surprised by the exhibit. Like I have learned a lot about my own state from the exhibit. I didn't know of all these women, and it's been really, I don't know, just so I think it's been really important to see just, I don't know, just amazing, like what Marilyn was saying, just strong, like independent women that are just getting the job done, and I feel like that to me feels pretty amazing. Again, I mean, I feel like maybe I'm just over reflective because I had a baby during the COVID year, so I've not seen anybody, but I feel like having a daughter now, I feel like this feels important to me. I want her to grow up here, and I want her to have have the connection to the outdoors, and I want her to fish and hunt and do outdoors things, and I want her to know those things. And I think that I just feel like looking around at that exhibit, I feel a little bit of peace. Like I feel like, okay, we've made a good decision. Like she's gonna be okay. Like this is a good state. And yes, do I wish she went out the door and saw more diversity? Yes, I do. That is hard, but I think some of the other gifts she's going to get growing up here are pretty amazing. And I don't think any state could, I mean, maybe I'm over romanticizing it because I've had a lot of time alone with her this year, but I feel like, I just think the exhibit is really important in that way. And I know other young girls that have gone to the exhibit that have, like, young ones, school age girls who've gone and really been excited and happy. And you know, I think Lindsay did an amazing job picking women like Afi Ellis and, like, you know, us and you know, a pilot and just all these like amazing different women. And I really I wish Lindsay was here so I could commend her, because I think she really has done a good job at not finding the typical stories from Wyoming, which we often see. I don't know, Aura, what you think.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Aura.
I wore my I Love Wyoming hoodie at the risk of being too informal on a panel. I thought this would be the right shirt to wear. Yeah, just agreement with what everyone else has said. In my experience, I think there has been so much room for me to just like pitch ideas, like throughout my life, even, you know, in junior high, my friends and I would be like, hey, we're going to start a band and let's get gigs for ourselves. And nobody, like, I think it's small enough that even a kid can pitch an idea and business owners will listen, right? And I could do that, you know, even throughout high school and then in college and in my career now. It seems like because the population is so low and we're able to know each other on a personal level, it's possible to do really big things without people telling you that you can't. And that's really empowering. So I feel like I've gotten so much of my strength from being in an environment where, you know, I'm invited to do things, or at least I'm not made to feel like I can't ask. And I'm also really happy that there was representation from the reservation in Lindsay's project. I do feel like one of the things that I would like to fix in my life, I grew up in Riverton, which is, you know, right on the edge of the Wind River Reservation. And because my parents are my parents, I grew up going to powwows, and I started going to sweats when I was in college and had, you know, some friends from the reservation growing up. But I realize as an adult now how separate I was and continue to be from that reality. So I think a lot of times when we talk about Wyoming, this, you know, huge chunk of land full of, you know, vibrant people in the middle of our state are kind of left out of the conversation. And so I love that Lindsay didn't leave that out. And one of the things that I, you know, want to work on as my life goal is to become more connected to the reservation as part of my heritage as a Wyomingite. So I've been trying to deepen those connections as well. And thank you for the land acknowledgement at the beginning, Katie.
Yeah. Aura, wait,
Katie,
I feel like you should tell the story of your bringing, I mean, talk about Wyoming experiences. Aura was telling the story in another setting I saw her where about your pan flute, bringing back and starting a pan flute, because you were in Peru. And I feel like this is so Wyoming to me, like that you can start a pan flute. I don't know, you can tell it better than I just think it's such a good story.
Yeah, so as an undergraduate, I was a music major, but also a globetrotter. And so I discovered that my home at the time was in world music. And so I had some amazing mentors at University of Wyoming, including Rod Garnett and Teresa Bogard. And this is a case in point of me being like this, you know, wide-eyed college kid with no inhibitions and some mentors who were like, yes, go for it. And I got to spend several summers studying music in different cultures, in different countries. And one summer I went with a couple of other young people to Peru. We learned to play Peruvian panpipes, and I personally fell in love with it so much. Like I connected to that music more than I'd ever connected to piano, and I played piano since I was age 5. But I came back and we were like, we knew how to play panpipes and we have this set. And my friends and I decided to start a panpipe group at the University of Wyoming, and it took fire. And it wasn't, the beauty of it was that it wasn't just like other music majors who joined. We just kind of sent out the word to the community, and there were some music majors, but there were like faculty from across campus and staff and community members, and probably half of them were like, I've never played music in my life, but I can blow this panpipe. And we were like an active performing group for probably 8 or more years. And then we've all since scattered quite a bit since then. But just, last month I reconnected because of the pandemic with my panpipe teachers in Peru, and they were having their annual festival online. And so they're like, hey, Aura, can you record something? And, tell us about your group there. And so even over 20 years, I've been able to reconnect. And that's another thing, like, yeah, why not start a Peruvian panpipe group in Laramie? And yeah, just one case of many ways that there are opportunities here to push the boundaries if you want to. And if the structures are there to support you.
I think one of the big contributions this exhibition has done or made is that when I was in Cody for the opening of this exhibition there, because Cody being such a big tourist spot, there were a lot of tourists who was at the museum who just wandered into this exhibit when I was there. And what I learned from a couple of them, they were German tourists, and they said to me they were so happy they walked into that exhibit because they had a different opinion of Wyoming. They had the idea that Wyoming was cowboys and Indians and mountains and what people see as Wyoming from the movies, I guess. But they said they were so impressed with the selection of women there and the people who were there at the exhibit. And this had given them a whole different image of Wyoming before they left to go back. And I thought about that. And the same thing happened when people on the reservation, people on who are isolated from the mainstream of Wyoming, see an exhibit like this. It gives them hope that there are women in this state that are not only allowed, but encouraged and promoted for what they've done in the state. And it gives hope and encouragement to people who think this can't be done. And I think Aura is so right, because if you want to do anything, you can do anything here. That's one thing I've learned. You've just got to go out and do it, because there's great support. There's a great thirst for new things in the state. And anybody who offers something that's a new experience is more than welcome here. It is the easiest state to, I think, get things done, because I've lived elsewhere and it's so complicated. Here, it's so easy if people recognize people who have the spirit and our willingness to contribute. And I think that's a great part of Wyoming. And for me, the other thing is what the exhibit has done is when a child on the reservation sees someone like me or Nina on it, and I've had that when I was in the legislature, that I would travel and somebody would come up to me and say, or I'd speak at schools when I was in the legislature. And if I spoke at a school in Riverton, kids would say to me, how did you do this? You know, you're so different. And when I tell them that not only am I from another country, I'm a different color, I'm a different ethnicity. And if I could step up and do what I've done in Wyoming, anyone can do it. Anyone, any girl could do it if they have that willingness to take risks. You have to take a risk in the state. You are rejected sometimes, and there are people who probably will not accept what you do. I've seen that in the media, working in the news. But on the other hand, every little triumph is a common triumph for all of us who are different. And I think that's what the exhibit did. I think Lindsay took great giant steps in giving us a new hope, new image. And I think she celebrated Wyoming's differences. And that was wonderful.
I'm sad she couldn't be here. And I think it's important to acknowledge her story as well in all of this. So for those of you who might not know, she was training in a dance career and needed a break. And so she took a photography course at Northwest College up in Powell and fell in love. And so all of a sudden, fast forward, she was in New York working with these amazing portrait photographers and thought, there's no way I would ever come back to Wyoming. But she found a place and decided to, celebrate her home state. And this project was born, and it's taken several steps. So that's where some of the chapters come. we had a conversation with Lindsay a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this, the impacts of this project kind of mitigating brain drain, right? It's like so many students don't see themselves having a place in Wyoming, but I think that is one of the impacts, is all of you have demonstrated that there's a place for us here and for a lot of different people. I want to point out Nicole Choi's comment. Thank you, Nicole, for sharing your story. And she kind of brings up a point, change feels slower in this state, but there's so many undone things we can do. And she feels hopeful about it. Are there things that the theme for this is kind of choose to challenge? Are there things that you all on our panel are interested in choosing to challenge more of right now in our state?
I guess I'll answer that. I think Aura and I'm not speaking for her, but I feel like we maybe have a similar thought on this. Is we've been really lucky to teach in this state. And I think that I feel like for me, that's I love teaching here, because it is always a little shocking to me to like, I teach in the honors college, and I have a lot of freshmen, and it's always interesting to me that there will be a freshman in my class who has read Shakespeare and Chaucer, and I think those are amazing writers, and I do not negate them at all, but has never read an Indigenous writer and has gotten to college, and that's in their backyard over here. And I feel like I really love being at the university, because I feel like it is an opportunity for me to be able to challenge by like teaching. And I think by making a diverse syllabus, by teaching, I love teaching. I teach a lot of post-colonial Indian lit. I'm teaching a class this semester called Exile and Migration, so it's just refugee and migration narratives, starting with the Bible, but going forward. And I think that like so many Wyoming kids they're so interested in the greater world. I think because we are a little isolated, I think I just am amazed at how it sounds so cheesy when I say it, but it's really rewarding how teaching is a thing that I think you make change. I really do. That's why I teach here, and I'm so happy to teach at UW, because I think the students here are really they are really interested, and they just haven't been exposed. And I think, a lot of the times I think about certain aspects of racism that I've experienced here in Wyoming, and they're often just comments that are kind of ignorant. They're not that it's someone that doesn't know, and they haven't been exposed to another culture. And so they say something that I'm like, no, that's not quite how it works. But they're so open. And I think that's the thing that I really have, I don't know, or if you feel the same way, but I think I think that's a really great, that for me, it feels very change forward.
I do feel the same way. And I'm actually gonna, I could echo everything that you just said about teaching, but I was reminded of something that I wanted to say earlier, and I don't want to let it slip. So I'm gonna take it in a little bit different direction, and maybe darker direction, because I have always been one of those like cheerleaders, like, yay, Wyoming, and feeling very much the same sort of enthusiasm that Nimi has expressed about, like, yes, this is a place we can do anything. And I just expressed that myself. But I remembered earlier, Nimi, when you were speaking at the beginning, you had talked about this like fire in your belly, and that being, especially as a woman of color, having to fight, but that as a source of strength. And I've always perceived that as a source of strength. But one of the things that I have realized in the process of thinking about my own identity as a descendant of Japanese Americans who were incarcerated on the basis of their race, I've learned a lot more about intergenerational trauma. And this, there's a lot of evidence for oppressed groups all over the place of intergenerational trauma. So even if you in your own life have not experienced racial hostility or mass incarceration, if your grandparents did, or if your ancestors were enslaved, there's some of that is still within us. And I have come to realize that a lot of my own way of carrying myself, which I always kind of marked off as being like, oh, it's because I'm a Wyomingite, or it's because I'm the youngest child, or, whatever, because I was raised Lutheran or whatever. I had all these other excuses, but now I'm realizing that my particular weirdnesses are kind of textbook for what intergenerational trauma looks like in the Japanese American experience. And some of that, Japanese American specifically, is this need to work, and make sure that you excel at everything and you do such a good job so that nobody can poke holes in what you're doing. And that's awesome. And I have succeeded in my life because of that tendency, but I'm learning now that that's also something that, my great-grandparents and my grandparents had to teach their children that, because if they were perceived as being anything other than 150% patriotic, 150% competent, like if any holes could be poked in their awesomeness, then they could be, ripped from their homes, put in prison, lose their jobs, all of these things. So I'm coming to see that in myself as like, okay, it's a cool thing that I have this strength, but I'm also wanting to explore why that is and not necessarily embrace it as much as I used to. So I've been, letting myself feel pain more, letting myself feel anger more, in a way that has been really healthy for me, because I've always been, such a everything's fine kind of girl. So I'll just put that out there.
Aura, thank you. One of my questions was, what does it mean to be brave? And I think sometimes we have this idea of what that looks like. But I think by you demonstrating some of those, like pushing against the status quo, and I think in some ways you all do this, but the fact that you just kind of came out with that is such a brave way, and choosing to challenge in your own like remarkable way. I have, what is it? We undervalue the power of joy, but I think we also undervalue the power of all those emotions. So thank you for being brave and sharing that with all of us.
Thank
And
you for listening.
responses from Marilyn or Nimi? And
Well, I'd like to make a comment about this last year in our lives. I know that this is not a COVID conversation, but it's how we've survived the last year. And I've learned some very interesting things from what we've been subjected to last year. One of the things is I'm amazed how women have emerged during this last year to hold the fort at home, to handle all the challenges we've faced with the COVID-19 crisis. Many families who are especially in the oil business, many men have lost their jobs over the last year and lost their jobs. They've been kept at home. And I think a couple of families that I know personally, I've seen the interesting change in the dynamics at home. A lot of these men, particularly when you work in oil, you're gone a lot of the time, and then you come home and you're back home for a while with the family, but you're gone a lot of the time. They have very little understanding or perspective of how their wives handle the families when they're gone. And I think suddenly they're home 24 hours and they watch what it takes to be a woman, a mother, and a caregiver. And initially, I think it was a shock for some of these men, because it meant not only were you home 24 hours, but you also had to, the children were being homeschooled, the mother was taking care of everything. And I've actually had a conversation with one of the men last week. He said, wow, I never had so much respect for my wife as I do now. I keep thinking she hasn't got a full-time job, so she's got it easy, and I'm the one who works in the family. But he said, staying home, and for the last few months, he said, I've learned differently. And the dynamics have changed. And I've seen a lot of women who've emerged with courage, who've created jobs for themselves. Like this one particular person started a job by herself from home. And women have shown their ability and their versatility in adjusting to situations. And I'm very proud of so many of the women here that have survived this last year and not given up. I'm also very proud of all the women who live alone and have been able to survive this last year. And I think it says something for the tenacity of women. And I think we all have it. And Wyoming women, particularly with the heritage of the pioneer woman who came out here pulled hand carts through snow blizzards and built it. There's a lot of it still left. I think if any weakness has come in our culture, and I'm probably going to be slammed for this, a lot of people who've moved from other places and come here come with different expectations and different values. And I find when I talk to an old ranching family and the woman says, I don't know what people are complaining about. You know, you have it so good now. And it's the truth. And I think the pioneering spirit of women still lives on in Wyoming in many ways. And I think very often people say people from outside give something to Wyoming. I think somebody like me, I have learned so much more being here. Forbearance, perseverance. I mean, 40 years ago, if I looked out of my window and saw 15 inches of snow outside my window, I would just go back to bed and come hide under the sheets. But this last week, we've had the snow and people just go on. I'm surprised that things closed because when I first came, nothing closed. People just went on and did what they did in the snow. It's part of Wyoming. I think Wyoming does teach women forbearance. And this show highlighted women who have stepped up to the plate and handled the challenges and still prevailed. And that's what I love about being here.
Those are great comments. I mean, it makes me, these same tapes I've been listening to and listening to what my grandmother's life was like in Hannah, and what in the world am I got to complain about? You know, and she was always happy and optimistic and helping and loving. And, you know, you look at that and think, how, I just feel like I'm falling short of what she would have been and was. At the same time, I think it's interesting, or when you talk about the intergenerational stuff, I think maybe some of her toughness did come down to me, you know, not recognizing that it was coming directly, because you have to take risks and put yourself out there. And Wyoming people in general, I think, are tougher because they kind of have to be when they look out the window. But I also think being a woman in all these different areas that we've talked about, it reminds me of the comment that Sandra Day O'Connor made, that she was excited to be the first woman justice on the U.S. Supreme Court, but she didn't want to be the last. And so she performed, at least in her view, as hard as she possibly could to do as good a job as she could. And I feel happy that at least I didn't cause the two women that came after me not to get their jobs, but hopefully I did the job. And the other thing I want to say is we still have this ability, and it might seem kind of insignificant, but the women's antelope hunt, the Wyoming women's antelope hunt, has really been a lesson for me in how we can reach out to younger women and women that aren't in our circle and share some of the privilege that we've had, but enable them to feel the independence and the strength and the self-sufficiency that maybe in their personal situation they didn't have the access to. And it is the silliest thing. I mean, it started as let's all go have fun and hunt together, and now, you know, you can't get through a hunt without people crying and talking about the impact that it's had on their lives. And that's extremely gratifying. And there's those kinds of opportunities in lots of other areas of Wyoming life, not just hunting. But I think we're very lucky to be women, and we're very lucky to be women in Wyoming.
And I think the point you made, Marilyn, that more women need to step up in political life because the Wyoming legislature is abysmally small fraction of the legislature is women. And watching last year's political drama in this country, watching all the stuff that went on all year, I thought to myself that if there were more women in politics, maybe we'll bring some decency and civility to the discourse a little bit. And because unfortunately, it was a terrible year, contentious, vituperative. And I'd like to think that women would be educated in politics, knowledgeable, but not bring all this testosterone to the table as they seem to do. And I think it'll be a very mellowing effect on all the conflicts that go on, because women handle families, they handle children, they handle husbands. So they probably should be able to handle political disputes without getting so personal and horrible. It's been a terrible year. And I hope it encourages more women to step forward and run for office, because until they do, we will always have this polarized sort of, climate in our political lives. And that's not healthy, because good people then don't want to come into politics. When I asked someone last election cycle, why don't you run? Because you're so good. Who wants to be in politics? It's so ugly. It's horrible. I don't want to be out there. And we will lose the leaders that we could have if we were all more like women, I guess.
Here, here, here.
Oh, you guys are delightful. You women are delightful. Are there any final comments or thoughts that you have for today? So closing comments, I guess, to wrap everything up.
Well, I will follow on that last astute observation. I just would, if there are women that are listening to this panel, I would encourage them to think about their roles in their communities. And there's an organization that was started by a friend of mine in Jackson called Leap into Leadership. And it's done wonders for increasing women involvement in various levels of politics around the state. And I think we desperately need that, Mimi. I just, and when you see some really effective legislators and our effective women elected officials, you see nothing but constructive efforts to make life better in Wyoming. And I'm hoping that'll be the case for all you young women out there that are listening, or maybe not so young. Get into it at any stage of life. We need women leaders.
Yeah. But when somebody wants to help women leaders and give money to people and support them, if they don't happen to be in your party, then they are constrained and slapped down for doing that. I think we need to recognize that it's not just supporting women of your party, but women all over to step forward. But we are unfortunately so compartmentalized here that there was somebody who a few months ago actually stepped out of her party and offered money to any women who were trying to run for politics. And she was completely put down by that. And unfortunately, we need to change our attitude. We need to find people who will work for all people in Wyoming, not their own party people. And I think that's really important. Once you're elected, once you're a judge, once you're a legislator, you're working for people, all people in Wyoming of all parties. They are your constituents. And we forget that often.
Nina, I think about Marilyn was saying get involved in your community, and you mentioned teaching as a way to do that. Are there other ways or advice you would give to women out there?
I mean, I remember going to a talk a few years ago, and it was Mike Sullivan and former Governor Sullivan and Al Simpson, and they were talking about civility in politics. And one of the things Mike Sullivan said, which has stuck with me, he's like, I don't know when politician became a bad word, because people who are politicians are like spending their life in public service usually, like they are putting themselves, I mean, I wouldn't put myself out there to be scrutinized and yelled at and trolled. I just, my hat is off to people that will be in service like that, because it's ugly right now. And I don't think I could I don't think I have this, I do not have the skin to deal with that. But I think, I've definitely found in Wyoming, again, like I don't think every door is just open because we live in a low populated state, but I think that that is not true. There still are many barriers, but I'm on the board of the Wyoming Arts Council, and that has been really satisfying to me, because arts is something I believe in very strongly. I believe that arts make people better and empathetic, and story is really important. Storytelling and stories are really important. So I feel like being involved in that small aspect of one facet of Wyoming has been so important to me, because of just, again, I believe in it. I think communities like, the Evanston Youth Orchestra, like that's amazing. They have an orchestra. Like, so I feel like for me, that's how I feel is the way forward in besides teaching. I think just getting involved in your community. It doesn't have to be putting yourself out hugely publicly. It could be small things, but like, small boards and things that just getting involved in your community. I think it's important. And sometimes I'm tired and I don't want to do those things, but I think I want Laramie to be a nice place. So I think it's important for me to be involved. Otherwise, what am I doing? Like, so I think, I don't know. I think that's something that I've seen more and more friends. I think the last political election, a lot more of my friends were volunteering and going door to door. And it was really cool to see, because I feel like I just haven't seen that as much in the last years. So yeah, Aura, I'll turn it to you.
I don't think I have anything to add. Other than in the last few minutes, I guess I'm kind of curious just to hear from Katie, because you're also a woman in Wyoming and you have been like, are you the curator for this exhibit or, okay, but you have been hosting it, and how, did you have any last comments as a woman in Wyoming and like someone who's involved with this exhibit?
Oh man. Well, what a great gift and a joy to listen to all of your stories and to learn from Lindsay, who's one of the most curious and excited people I've ever met before. I'm sad she wasn't here today, but I'm actually a Wyomingite, a fourth generation Wyomingite. And so I feel like my roots run really deep here, and to know the authentic Wyoming, all the parts of the Wyoming, and sometimes that's not a beautiful history, I think is important for all of us to know. But I think the way Lindsay has put this project together and the podcast pieces, and that it's so layered, I've learned so much about the state that I love to call home. And I had a very similar story to Lindsay, that I went away because I didn't see myself wanting to be in Wyoming. But I'm so glad that I came back, and I'm so glad our museum has this exhibition. I'm sad that it's COVID, but we do hope to be able to bring people together in person. And I think the last piece that I'll close with is that you can still participate in this project. Lindsay's still going with it. So she's put together a Google text and chat line. I can post it in the chat, but if people have inspiring women, they can put more things together and see where it goes. I think for me, I think about my history. I'm really curious about Maryland. I grew up in Carbon County and in encampment, actually, and these are my grandmother's necklace from a long time ago. So now I'm like, I want to have a larger conversation about what that means.
We will.
And I think that's the beauty of Wyoming, is we are all connected in some strange sort of way. This exhibition, I just keep learning from. So I guess thank you all for sharing your stories. I feel like I'm in the midst of greatness. And Nina, thank you for powering through today. I hope you can rest.
I'm gonna lie down now.
Good.
Don't schedule anything after your second shot, friends.
Heads up, right? And for those in the audience, thanks for sticking around. We do have one more panel on March 25th. It's an evening panel from 5 to 6:30, and there's a registration link I can put out, but it features Lauren Gurney, who is a helicopter pilot and cake baker, Jesse Allen, who's a yogi and backcountry guide and hunter. Lynette Sinclair is from the reservation, or I'm sure you probably know Lynette, but she's a linguist and a language preservationist. Megan Grassel, who she started Yellowberry Bra Company for young tweens, which is great. And then the amazing Rita Watson, who's been with the Department of Education for forever. So those women will be joining us then. I hope you all can come back, invite a friend. And without further ado, please take this energy into the rest of the day and into the world, and inspire each other. And just so much gratitude for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, for doing this. It's been a lot of fun. It's been great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really fun.
Thanks, everyone.